Hello, this interview is one in a series of interviews that Special Collections Section of the State Archives of North Carolina is conducting with the American Indian Heritage Commission to record the lived experience of indigenous communities in North Carolina. These oral histories will be part of an archived series and will be made available to the public. Today is Monday, February 13th, 2023. It is 1:11 p.m. This is a continuation of part 2 of an interview with, if you can give us your full name and spell it for us.
Gregory Richardson, Gregory Richardson.
All right, and this interview is being conducted for the American Indian Heritage Commission Oral History Project. The interviewer is me, John Horan. I have
Curry Bird, Kerrybird.
And
Quinn Godwin, Quinngodwin.
Thank you both. This video interview is being conducted in person at the Archives and Records Building at 109 East Jones Street in Raleigh, North Carolina. So last time, just to orient, we left off with a discussion of we were in the middle of your career. We were moving from one position to another. If you can take it from there.
Okay, leaving the banking system, coming to work with the Indian Commission in January 1975. It's my first experience with the commission. Started working in the old Comprehensive Employment and Training Program as my first job, entry-level position, while getting oriented to that position. First layer of that was attending a series of meetings in-state and out-of-state to start what was viewed as the training process for staff, the CETA staff at the Commission of Indian Affairs. We had already become engaged in the Educational Talent Search Program, but I was hired in the CETA program, which is funded by the U.S. Department of Labor and is a specialty set-aside program by the U.S. Department of Labor and the U.S. Congress. So there's legislation that dictate that this program is funded and that the recipients of the program have to be tribally enrolled. My first task was to basically attend a training session in Atlanta, Georgia. And then the second one was a training session in Raleigh or Cary at the Happy Inn over there. And that was a workshop led by Russell Heeb. Russ Heeb was a grant writer and had spent pretty much all of his life working with the Indian Commission and with our tribes, writing grants and that kind of, serving as kind of like a grant writer and consultant, that kind of thing. At first, he was on loan to the Commission of Indian Affairs from the North Carolina Department of Labor. So the Department of Labor did what's, I guess, called an intergovernmental assignment with him. So he was basically assigned to us full-time to work with the Indian Commission to provide training. He led training, strategic planning sessions, and those kind of things. So at the meeting in Cary, I got to meet the other staff from all over the state, met staff like Jackie Brewington and others who were coming on board at that time. We basically were starting out fresh. None of us had any experience in working with government. None of us had any experience in terms of managing programs like this. So the Comprehensive Employment and Training Program, CETA, was funded through Congress to provide an opportunity for Indian people to get experience and to bring services into the community. So the CETA program, by legislation, was designed to provide training and educational opportunities for disadvantaged American Indians. So first of all, applicants would have to be enrolled tribal members. You would have to have a tribal enrollment card. Secondly, the participants would have to be eligible, meet the income guidelines to be enrolled in the program. From the outset, training was being provided by Russell and some other folks. One of the regional meetings was held in Atlanta, Georgia, the second layer of that. And then we kind of got rolling with the implementation. So implementation involved setting up a series of offices throughout the state. So the offices for the Commission of Indian Affairs, of course, is right here in Raleigh. Other offices were established in places like Coharie community, the Haliwa-Saponi community, Waccamaw, community. Then we had the urban part of that came later, which was offices that were set up in Charlotte, Greensboro, and in Fayetteville. So our role was to pretty much jumpstart that process. So the director of that program was Mr. Owen Grove, who's co-Harry from Sampson and Harnett County. He was director of the CETA program from the outset, and then he brought on a team of people who were basically to implement the program, and I was one of those team members. I was kind of like an outreach person who went out into the communities, made contact with the tribes, have some conversations with leaders in the tribal communities, not just by myself, but with Owen and oftentimes other staff. At that time, the director of the commission was Mr. Early Maynor, and Harold Deese was the assistant director of the commission. We were basically housed at the old Heart of Raleigh Hotel over in Raleigh. And Kerry, I still have that old sign from the old Heart of Raleigh when they tore it down over there. I went over and said, hey, I'd like to have this sign. And they said, yeah, get it. So it's over at the Indian Commission now. I like to show that off once in a while when we have events that talk about the history of the commission. So we were stationed, all the staff was at the Heart of Raleigh, which is right up the street from here. It was an old hotel. It looked like an abandoned hotel, which it really was probably should have been. We all had individual offices, which were sleeping rooms, hotel rooms actually. And there was an abandoned pool there, so you'd come out on the balcony and look down, there was a huge old pool there. So we had the CETA program, we had talent search, and then we had a community services type program that was a whole different project and staff. And so all of that was housed there for a time until we started moving up and getting better offices with state government. So we had no hot water. We had no heat in that building. We all had to scrounge up and get little space heaters to keep our feet warm. And that was when I started drinking coffee. And the reason I was drinking coffee is holding the cup, keep my fingers warm, and warming myself up. So from that point forward, I've been drinking coffee. So we started gearing up the program from there through the training process. Next phase of that was recruiting staff for these field offices. So Owen and I would go out to Greensboro, Fayetteville, Waccamaw, Siouan, Haliwa-Saponi, and then started recruiting staff. Of course, through that process, we already had people that were recommended by Chief Richardson and people in the Cohary community and Jacobs down in Waccamaw. There were leaders that were already in place that were recommending people to Owen. So had a stack of applicants, started the interview process, and then started hiring people in different locations across the state. Opening offices, one of the things that I remember distinctly was going into places like Greensboro and Charlotte, looking for office space because the urban areas were not quite like the rural tribal communities. In the tribal communities, you already had some office space because tribes had a nucleus, may not have had an office at that time, but they had the wherewithal to establish an office. So starting with my tribe, Haliwa-Saponi, Herbert Richardson was hired, Kathy Wilson was hired as manpower developers in Haliwa-Saponi. Harvey Green was another manpower developer. These were the first line staff in that employment and training program, manpower developers, empowering people to gain skills and training through that CETA program. So then we moved down to Cohary area, and there was people like Carol Brewington and the Jacobses down at Waccamaw, and then in Fayetteville, Gertie Brewington was one of the employees who's Secretary Cashwell's mother. She was one of the people that was on that staff at that time. So we're going out, opening offices, recruiting staff, and then recruiting trainees. So once we get staffing in place with people who knew the communities and could get out into the communities and find the folks that needed training, that would be interested in attending the training, becoming enrolled, that was the next phase of that. So today, The only one I think out there that was part of that, of course myself, James Harden, Danny Bell came later. These are people who were able to get jobs and are good examples of people who went through the CETA program, the job training program, and went on to become leaders in the community for years to come. Carol Brewington, Brenda Moore, people like that who made it a career in terms of working either at the state level or going on to work with the tribe. And James Harden with Lumbee Regional Development, he just retired and now is back as a CEO of some other entity that they put together down at LRDA. So the concept of the program is to put a system in place to where we could get our folks trained to get jobs. So we're coming at a time, 75 was a time that most of our people had not been able to get a job in government. You could not just fill out an application and come to work with state government or with local county governments or private industry. We weren't being hired. I mean, when we go in and fill out an application, it was like, well, you need this, you need more, so there's always a barrier. There's always a red flag or some reason that we couldn't get jobs. So the bottom line was that we didn't have things on our resume that would help us move up the ladder in government or even get into the door. We didn't know anything about grants. We didn't know anything about grant writing. We didn't know anything about working for the state government at that time. We came from a farming community. Our families all farmed. Our families either worked in construction, worked on the farm, owned farm, ran the farm, raised tobacco, cotton, and that's how we sustained ourselves. So now we're moving in the 70s to a different level, whereas there's an opportunity to get some training and to go to a community college to get some skills, to get something on your resume through which you can then qualify for a position in government. So when I came, I guess I was fortunate that when I came to Vietnam, I was able to get the job at the bank, so I had a little bit of a different background than most of the folks in our community. In fact, my dad, when I decided to leave, I might have mentioned this earlier, but he really kind of got upset with me about, you're first of our people at work, got a job at the bank. Are you crazy? Why are you leaving the bank? I said, well, they don't pay much, and the state doesn't pay much more than that, but it's a good opportunity. And I'll have retirement. When I said that, the light turned on, because mom nor dad ever had a job when they had retirement. So I came to work in January of '75. So that system was established at the Heart of Raleigh Hotel. Rolling out from there, the commission meetings were often there at the Heart of Raleigh Hotel. Some of the commission meetings were in this room, downstairs in the auditorium, and other spots in the downtown government. But then a lot of the commission meetings were held right out in the Indian communities. So we would go out to the tribes and meet at a tribal office someplace out in the communities. Another evolution started with that was the first time some of our tribes had a lease with the state for office space. So we were leasing space from Haliwa-Saponi, Coharie, Waccamaw-Siouan. In the urban areas, of course, Guilford Native was just being established, I think in '76. Metrolina Native American Association was coming along about that time. Later on, Triangle Natives Society was established. And so we worked to get temporary space in Greensboro and in Charlotte. And the idea was there to have a spot as a nucleus where we could, huddle, have a phone, for us to get messages. And we didn't have computers back then, so the phone was the only way to communicate. So through that network, we were able to locate the people that were kind of identified as the leaders in those areas. Didn't have to do that in the rural areas, but we had to do that in the urban areas. So for probably the better part of a year, we spent trying to do two things: identify the leaders and identify the best place for those offices to be located. We didn't want offices where they would be so far from the nucleus of the Indian community that people wouldn't participate. So the theory was to try to find a place. So we did that. The first offices, we didn't stay in that long, and that was on purpose, until we could figure out where the best location would be. Did the same thing in Charlotte. But again, we didn't have to do that with the Cumberland County Association or the tribes because the nucleus was already there. So from that started the evolution of the urban centers, the staffing that was put in place in like 76, 78 became staff later on for the urban centers. So some of the very staff that we had in our CETA program, when the urban centers were geared up and were becoming established, they then were able to apply independently of the Commission of Indian Affairs and seek their own funding for the CETA program. So one by one they did that. So Greensboro, Charlotte, Cumberland County Association. And so when that happened, some of the same staff that worked for us then became employees of the Urban Indian Center. So Vale Carter was one of those employees who left the commission and went over to work with the Metrolina Native American Association as an example. Through that, the network starts to grow. Continually, the commission members all came from these communities. Once the urbans were established, then the urbans were empowered to hold seats on the commission. They were more or less made members of the commission. And so the commission expanded between 75 and 80. So at first it was just the 5 tribes that established the Commission of Indian Affairs, which would have been the Coharie, Haliwa-Saponi, Lumbee, Waccamaw-Siouan, Eastern Band of Cherokee. So those 5 pretty much set out to create the commission with the support of the tribes, and then those leaders were able to get support through the General Assembly to establish and create the Commission of Indian Affairs in 1971. So stayed involved with the CETA program through early 80s. Then in 78, we were awarded a grant program from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which was the Section 8 housing program. So Russ Heeb again was a leader and strong force in helping to make that happen. So the Indian Commission then became a public housing agency, and PHA. You know, we have the Indian Housing Authority, but that hadn't been created when the Section 8 program was developed. It was kind of being created at that time. And I remember after Bruce Jones came on board that after Early Maynard's tenure, the Indian Housing Authority was a thought. It was a file folder in Bruce's desk. And there was, in that folder, when we'd have our meetings, he'd bring it out and he'd talk about with the staff and with Russ. Of course, Russ had his files too. But the idea here is we're moving forward, and that file included the nucleus, which ended up being the North Carolina Indian Housing Authority. And so in 78, I believe it was, the Indian Housing Authority was created by legislation. And after that, the commission became a public housing agency designated by HUD and received its first allocation of Section 8 units. So that's kind of a very unique situation in history, because the commission, being a public housing agency, and still is, operates a network of public housing services that are for all people, not just Indians. So that put the commission in a position where it showed that it was diverse. It also put the commission in a position where it was providing some much needed housing, although it was rental housing. So we had the rental housing component kind of resolved in that you had the HUD Section 8 housing program being authorized through a contract with HUD. And at the same time, you had legislation being created for the Indian Housing Authority. So the Indian Housing Authority was created, and through that, another channel of funding was created through the Office of Indian Housing out of the HUD in Chicago. So what happened there was Leon Jacobs, Lumbee, who was very involved with HUD and worked with HUD, became administrator for the Eastern Woodlands Regional Office. And through that network, funding became available for 204 Indian housing units in like 79 or between 79, getting a little fuzzy here on the timelines, but shortly thereafter, the first allocation of funding came through, which was 204 units, which meant that there was about 3 million, if I remember correctly, was the first allocation of over several $1 million coming to Indian country in North Carolina, and that was unheard of. You know, moving from grassroots communities, getting a CETA grant, which was 200 and some thousand, which was big at first, certainly made a big difference, to now 3 million. So out of that first allocation, Indian housing units were being developed and built in the Lumbee community, Red Hills over in Fayetteville, right by the Indian Housing Authority in Fayetteville. That one was 92 units. Red Hills in Robertson County, I believe that was right at 50, 75, don't remember. And then just north of Red Hills, like going to Rayford, Hawkeye Sands was built. And that was 3 projects. We always call them projects. That's kind of the way HUD assigns its funding. So you have a project number 001, 002, 003, and the HUD dollars come in along those lines. So for the first time, the Indian Housing Authority was then allocated funding, and a contract was awarded to build those units. The architect was out of Atlanta who designed the units. They were all rental units. And there was Red Hills, Hawkeye in Hoke County, and then the Eagles Nest in Cumberland County. Eagles Nest was a 92-unit project. And Eagles Nest, that one got really kind of tricky because things got behind. HUD was really on the commission's back to go ahead and implement those projects because HUD has money in the pipeline. So the threat came to the commission that the next phase, which was supposed to be up in Haliwa-Saponi, those funds were threatened to be taken back because they weren't able to move the project forward and get a contract, get a bid out and start construction. So the way that Cumberland County was able to get 92 units was that first project was combined with Cumberland County. That's how it ended up with 92 units rather than 40-some units. So Haliwa had to wait a period of time for another allocation of funding before they could build up in the Haliwa-Saponi community. So that was really an interesting time, a lot of growth, a lot of interest, people interested in you. Here we're getting a $3 million project. Of course, people want to know what's going on. There was a lot of miscellaneous things, kind of sidebar things coming into play there too, because you had the architect, you had land in the community that was needed. So there was the acquisition of property for these complexes. Very complex because the architect that designed the project was from Atlanta, Georgia. His specialty was designing low-income housing projects for low-income communities, cities, primarily cities. So he pulled off of his shelf, the way it was explained to me, a set of plans that were designed to go into an urban area, like a city. The problem was Red Hills, Hawkeye, with the exception of Fayetteville, nobody had sewage. You might have had some county water. I think those county water lines were ran during that time out to those complexes, but didn't have sewage. So you had to run the operation based on septic tanks. So the reason these projects got behind during those days, and I was not director of the Section 8 program when all this was going on, but I eventually became director. At that time, I was still in the CETA program and working with Owen Grove. Owen was going back to CETA just momentarily. Unfortunately, Owen passed away. He ended up with cancer, and he never did see the CETA program really to where it became because he got sick. And so after 78, a young lady from Coharie, I can't remember her name now, she became director of the section of the Indian housing program. And she worked really right out of the heart of Raleigh Hotel with the rest of us. So the commission was rolling out a project that was really not under the commission, but the Indian Commission was the applicant. So what we're doing now is we're rolling a really major project out in the community. So when the Indian Housing Authority was developed by legislation, of course, it had a board that needed to be appointed. The board was appointed, constituted, staff was hired. Then they have to, of course, find office space. So Gloria was the director of the first phase of the Indian Housing Authority. And Gloria stayed in that program just, and I'll remember her last name shortly here, hopefully. But she was only director for a short period of time. And then another director was brought in, and he didn't stick for very long. And when all that was happening, you see, HUD is on the back of the commission to implement this project. So in government, everything is timeline. The fiscal year is ending. This money's, probably got out late to the commission. So we're already behind the 8 ball starting out. So HUD's really on the backs of the leadership of the commission first, and then when the Housing Authority roll out through legislation. Housing Authority legislation, General Statute 157, basically set forth the terms and conditions of how the Housing Authority would be established. And the actual legislation of the Housing Authority is attached on the back end of the Public Housing Authority legislation on the books for the state of North Carolina. So Chapter 157 is that chapter. And 157, I don't remember the final A, B, C in parentheses and all that, but it's there. But it's there, and it sets forth how many commissioners would be on the Indian Housing Authority, and the authority spelled out by the legislation in terms of what that authority is empowered to do. So it already had the money, but what had to take place as things roll out is getting that money from the Indian Commission allocated over to the new entity. So that took some finagling and doing to get it legally in place to do that. So the Indian Housing Authority developed the first phase. 204 units were built, and then during that process, while all that was happening, I became director of the Section 8 housing program. And so, and I think it was like, I have to look back at my resume to get those dates, but becoming director of Section 8, and that happened because my father was in construction, and I kind of grew up in a construction family. So while I'm over here in the CETA program, I'm running next door down the gallery there, talking to folks in the Section 8 program. Hey, what's going on? How's this happening? And I was actually helping them collect some information as part of that in terms of land, where land availability is in the communities, helping find land at Haliwa-Saponi. You might say, well, there's a lot of land in our communities. Why was there a problem finding land for these phases of Indian housing units? Well, Indian people didn't really want to sell their property because they wanted to keep the property in the family. So they were not really open or receptive to, saying, yeah, I'll sell you this 20-acre tract of land, but, I got to talk to my wife, I got to talk to my dad, come back, oh, no, we can't sell that because it's been in the family for generations. So that played out over and over and over. So eventually, there was people in the community that had some connections with non-Indians that had property. And eventually some of the property that was acquired did come from Indian people because they had a vast amount, and it was not going to be a real impact, especially in Robertson County. I don't remember who the original landowner was at Red Hills, but that's a matter of record, so we can look that up very easily. And then Cumberland County was unique and different because it was not right in the Indian community. So that land was purchased from an influential non-Indian person right in Cumberland County.
Yeah, so this is while you're a director of the Section 8. Yeah, so let's I want to get into that, but I want to just kind of set up the stage a little bit more about the early days, 75, so it's established in 71 by statute. It's interesting to me, and maybe you can speak to this, why do you think that 71 was, why do you think that all of this is happening in this period? Why not sooner?
Well, because we weren't empowered as a people sooner than that. You have to realize in the mid-60s was a civil rights era. So if we look at what was going on in the civil rights era in 60, we go back to 64, the riots and all the burning of parts of D.C. and civil unrest, and people saying, hey, we're just not going to take this anymore. So from like 63, 64 to 71, a lot of things were starting to change in our society, in America and in our state, to say, hey, maybe we need to look at ways that we can empower people. So Indian people came in the late 60s to Raleigh and started talking with legislators and said, look, we have all kinds of empowerment for, other people, and we would like our seat at the table as well. So there came, the creation of the Indian Commission in 1971. That would not have happened, though, if it had not been for the influences of some key people in our state, and I mentioned a few earlier. John Willie Oxendine, Robeson County. John Willie and at that time, John Willie Oxendine and Lieutenant Governor Hunt were like that. And they were key players in the Democratic Party politics in this state. And so was our other Indian leaders. So they were, talking with and corralling leaders in the state who were, bringing about change for other populations, and they would say, well, what about American Indians? So they were able to, get support for the thought of, hey, let's create an Indian Commission so we've got a voice in the state for our communities. And so that's kind of how that happened. Chief Richardson was a key player in that. John Robert Jones, they came later, and Lonnie Revels came later. And I'm kind of getting away from that span of time, 60s, 70s, but there's a transition occurring in the mid-60s to the early 70s politically. Our people becoming more and more empowered to be at the table, and the system is becoming more and more receptive to inviting us to the table. And so that was an interesting interplay between our leaders and our community, state officials, and everything going at that period of time. So oftentimes I'll say, while the civil rights movement really impacted the African American community, the black community, but it also helped empower the American Indian community because we had very similar circumstances. Poor community, poor schools. Our schools had books that were hand-me-downs from other schools, some other students' names in them. So you'd open up the book and here's all these names already in the book. So we were becoming more and more empowered through that network of leaders and through that inner working with, non-Indians as well too, because I don't think we would have gotten an Indian Commission established had it not been for the support of some African Americans at that same time. Because again, we were dealing with some of the same circumstances. The creation of the Haliwa-Saponi school, the Indian school at that point that I went to, I mentioned in the earlier piece, was definitely part of that. And then many years before that, East Carolina Indian School and Coharie and Wide Awake Indian School and Hawkeye and all these other schools that were created around the countryside were pretty much in the same category. These were one-room schools that people had to pool their money together to have a school. Our people had to pool their money to pay the teachers. And then at some point, there was a realization, well, this is not really right. For these people are tax-paying citizens, and we're counting them on the census, and yet we're not providing them with schools. And so things start to evolve through that network of interplay. But John Willie Oxendine, a farmer, saw him at this building at one of the commission meetings. He had Bill overalls on. Everybody else is pretty well dressed up. But that was John Willie Oxendine. I mean, a huge farmer in Robeson County, and very connected politically, not just in Robeson County. I think that was a distinct difference too from where we are now. But he was wired at the state level as well as wired on the local level. So brought about huge change for our people. Right.
That's a tremendous answer. Yeah, I appreciate that. And then the next follow-up from this earlier section that you just covered is, you mentioned it a little bit, but I was kind of hoping maybe we can expand on it and touch on upon if there was ever any kind of, you can correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like when you set up the programs in the communities, it was very receptive because, right, this is a program to help, and
right.
It's not like the housing. You're not asking to buy land. You're kind of setting up shop, leasing space in the community.
Mm-hmm.
You know who the leadership is. Now, you said it's different for the cities because it's a little bit more dispersed, a little bit more.
Right.
But I'm wondering, that's from the community. What about from sort of non-Indian communities in these cities? Were they helpful? Were they discriminatory? How did you interact with them when you're setting up these programs in those, the CETA program?
The strategy for that was to let the local leaders that we ultimately found. So initially, we didn't set out, to decide where the office would be. We just went in to find, like, Jim Brewer in Guilford County. Jim Brewer was involved there, and he had interplay with the leadership in Guilford County and Greensboro. So through him, you were able to make contact. Later on, contact came with Ruth Revels and Lenny Revels. But Jim Brewer was one of the initial contacts that helped us, to locate where we're going to, or determine where we're going to rather maybe set up for the initial offices out there. And so, from that point forward, people like Lonnie and Ruth were wired in city council. Lonnie ran for city council one time, and I think he won. Eventually became a street named after him and all these things. And so through that, you had a surgence of influence coming in from the non-Indian side, both African-American and white. So that's one of the ways I think that yielded tremendous success in some of the in urban areas in terms of getting things moving forward.
Did you ever? So that's a blueprint for success,
Mm-hmm.
and it sounds like you had
So
great success in Guilford.
Right.
But did you ever have an instance where it didn't work out and you had to try over?
Well, first office didn't last very long in Guilford because we selected what we thought was the best location was not acceptable by the community. So we had to backpedal pretty quick to move out of where we were. And right now it's kind of populous section of Greensboro, where all the development's going, like the downtown area of Greensboro, where all the swanky restaurants and everything's now. But back then that was not the place. So we were looking at what we had in the budget to spend. So we got a modest office, 2 little spaces on that same street. But after we kind of got in there, that the community says, "Oh no, we need to be in a different part of town." So we moved. Same thing in Charlotte. When we went down and what I meant to say earlier, we didn't really focus ourselves on contacting those instrumental leaders because we didn't know. I didn't know them. But we had to find the Indian people in the community who were then connected and wired to those politicians. So that was the strategy. So we didn't really work that network that much after we identified the Indian community. We let the Indian community work that network.
Nice. Okay.
But we didn't have to do that in the Haliwa, these other communities.
Yeah, I really appreciate that contrast. I think it's valuable to kind of get
Mm-hmm.
that on the record. And then the other follow-up from that time period, and it sort of transitions into your time with the housing, is You said a phrase that I just grabbed onto. I wanted to make sure I asked about it. You said something about it was a file in his desk.
Yeah,
It was just an idea.
right.
I want to know, how did you, maybe you want to use that specific instance or another file in his desk that was an idea that turned into something real.
Yeah.
How did it go from being an idea
Right.
to being real?
Well, much of what we have now started the same way. It was a file either in a desk drawer or on someone's desk, because people are meeting and focusing on needs and focusing on, well, what direction should we go? And that happened for years as we developed with the Commission of Indian Affairs. And that's how we started out with the talent search program, and then how we moved into CETA, and that's how we moved into, Section 8, just a file. And that file included a piece of legislation, perhaps, that set forth the terms and conditions of how these monies are funded. Who are the funding agencies? What's the contact? A phone number for the funding agency, the address of the funding agency. I'm sure a copy of the Federal Register that talks about the funding for this particular funding, whether it's housing, whether it's CETA, whether it's other. So those files grew as we have those discussions, as we have meetings. There's minutes generated for the meetings. Copy those minutes, go in those file folders. So you have multiple copies of minutes. You have a budget. Once you've actually decided to apply for the grant funding, you have to create a grant document, which includes a budget, all that. So that file goes from a little narrow file to a file cabinet, you see. And so I would say that's kind of how things evolved early on with us, because computers were not around at all. In some cases we still had the party lines at Haliwa-Saponi, where you'd call down there and you'd have be somebody else on the phone, so you'd have to wait until somebody got off the phone. Certainly didn't have a cell phone, that kind of stuff. So we've come a long way.
That's for sure. Yeah. Okay. So then, the next question is about the Section 8 piece. You mentioned the architect, and you mentioned kind of designing these buildings, to be on sewer lines, and they weren't on sewer lines. How did you solve that problem? First of all, were you in charge? Were you the head at that time, or
I came in after. See, Gloria was the first director, so those plans were being laid out then, working with HUD, and that's where I was saying before there was a real crunch on the back of the commission, because the HUD was coming in, the program office folks would fly in and come in and say, look, folks, we got to move these projects, or we're going to have to transfer the money. So Gloria was there first, and then after that things kind of got rolling. I left the Indian Commission in '89, so there's quite a bit of time between '79 and '89. So I left in the fall of '89, I believe, and went over to the Indian Housing Authority. And so up to that point, I was director of Section 8. And that project started out, I believe, with like 200 units, and then expanded to like 500 or 600 units. Oh, and I did want to say something about the geographic area, the span of the geographic area that the commission has focused on even back then and still is now. So one question has been, and still is oftentimes, well, why does the commission have a Section 8 program? Commission is a public housing agency. We have a contract with HUD. So what was going on in the 70s was that you had counties that were very conservative, and they didn't want to have anything to do with low-income housing. So they didn't want to apply for a grant or a program to provide rental housing. So Russ He was the person who had that connectivity with HUD, and so a HUD official contacts him and says, we've been trying to get the Section 8 program into Halifax, into Warren County, Sampson County, Columbus County, and I guess red light went off, and HUD says, well, heck, these are the Indian counties in the state. Why don't we apply for that? So he comes back, talks with the commission about it. The commission member says, oh, yeah, because the vote would have had to occur at the commission table for that to happen. So application goes in the HUD, and And so we're operating in the same counties pretty much that we're operating with the CETA program. We already have offices there. We already have staff there. We already have tribal leaders there. So we don't have to go out and recreate the wheel, reinvent the wheel. So we can work with the same tribal leaders to implement that program. We can work with the same commission staff to implement that program. So that's kind of how it evolved from cross parallel, working with two different programs, different staff that's already in place, and all the commission members that are already in place. So the places we had those offices, they were instrumental in terms of implementing that Section 8 program, which we already had a phone out there then, you see. And I would have to say too that the Indian Housing Authority and the Section 8 program has been a tremendous boost to the economy, I think, of our communities. And I say that for this reason, is that because we are operating a Section 8 program, we have more American Indians in our program than any of the other state public housing agencies, because we're operating in the Indian communities. So we are also sending out checks to landlords. So we're also proud to say that we have more American Indian landlords participating in this program than any of the other programs except for Robeson County, the Lumberton Housing Authority. And that's because our people have become knowledgeable how the Section 8 program works. So what they've done, we have people up at Haliwa and other areas who've developed trailer parks and other rental properties, and so they're renting to people right there in the community. So the CETA program, similar, which is now the Workforce Investment Act program. Labor changes the names of these programs over and over the years, but same thing applies there. That's where we've got more American Indians attending community college to get a trade, whether it's accounting, auto mechanics, heat and air, whatever the case might be, except for Robeson County, and that's because of the population of Lumbees in Robeson County. So if we didn't have these programs in Columbus County, Sampson County, Halifax, Warren, Granville, Person County, you would probably have very few American Indians at all participating in these programs, because there's no presence, there's nothing to drive that interest and to share that information with our communities.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so you're in charge of the Section 8 from you said 79-ish until 89.
Right.
And then at that point, you swap over to the
right.
To what now?
The Indian Housing Authority.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so talk about that.
Lee Epps, who is Saponi, then Indians of Person County, at the office one day, and this is when Gloria had resigned. And so the board of directors of the Indian Housing Authority was starting a search for a new director of the Indian Housing Authority. So Leroy Epps called me and he says, Greg, I'd like to talk with you about the possibility of you coming down and directing our Indian Housing Authority. And I said, wow. I wasn't looking for a job, you know. And, I had, at that point, I'd been with the Indian Commission with the state for 14 years. So I had to think about retirement. I had to think about my benefits package, because I was going from a state position at that time to a quasi nonprofit public corporation that had no state retirement, no benefits. And we talked. He came to Raleigh when we met, went lunch. And eventually I decided I would put a resume together and submit it. And so was interviewed and ended up getting that job. So my initial task and my commitment to him was that I would apply for the position as long as the board of directors would bring in a retirement plan and a package that would be similar to the state. That I couldn't leave this position with the state and not have benefits. So that came together, went down there, was happy with the package, and from that point, we built Red Earth, well, not Red Earth, but we started the Cohary Village project in Sampson County, was the next phase that was in development, in the pipeline. So put out a bid announcement, started construction of Cohary Village over in the community, and that's about 20 units. These are duplexes. So Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say, I meant to mention this earlier about the architect and the first phase of the Indian Housing Authority. Before I go into the too much detail, I want to get this in. So the architect was pulling off-shelf plans that he could just bring to the Indian Housing Authority. And this is my understanding that's done all the time in the industry. So you modify them to fit the package, that the land and everything that the units are going on. The problem was that they were all duplexes, and they were all built on one street. And our people are not, our people live in the country, so they're not used to having a neighbor right up next to them. They're not used to not being able to have a garden in the backyard. They have the pet in the backyard, you know. So the first phase of implementation of that project was kind of tough because you had to try to get our people to accept living in apartments when they've never lived in apartments. So there was all kinds of human things going on. I mean, there were fights, you know, somebody said something to somebody, and first thing you know, they, mostly on Saturday night, Saturday night, and there'd be a fight. So eventually we kind of got beyond that, but it was really tough to kind of implement the Indian Housing Project, considering the way the design was in a rural area. And so when I came, my thoughts were we need to break the density down. So we still had duplexes, but they were spread out more. And then the next phase of that was home ownership. So the Waccamaw-Siouans got the benefit of the first phase of the Indian Housing Authority's home ownership program. The second phase went to Red Earth Village at Haliwa, and that's when I had the opportunity to leave the Indian Housing Authority and go to HUD in Washington, D.C. So I wasn't there through the completion of Red Earth, but Red Earth is in Haliwa, the first home ownership project, and it's still there today. Folks own those homes now; they're not renting. And then Waccamaw-Siouan, that community, those folks own those homes, not renting. The Red Earth, Hawkeye Sands, and the units in Fayetteville, that's still tough property to manage because of the density. So in Fayetteville, you've got 92 units on 7 acres. I mean, you're living like that. And the other complicated thing about it is it's down a one-way street, a dead-end street. So a lot of issues with that. Hard to manage. Still to this day, hard to manage, to keep the units full. And so when you got a program like that, you have to keep the units rented in order to make the numbers work. You can't keep the units rented. You can't sustain yourself. You got to have the money for upkeep and maintenance, pay the staff and those kind of things. So if you got 10% of your units, 5% of your units vacant, you're losing money. That's tough. So the Indian Housing Authority moved in that direction. I left 93 and 93, 94, somewhere in there, and had an opportunity to go to work, go up at the HUD as a special assistant to the Assistant Secretary of Public and Indian Housing. And that was...
sorry to interrupt you there, but so now just to get my trajectory, your state, then you were kind of like quasi, kind of nonprofit,
with the
public,
Indian Housing Authority.
and now it's federal.
Right.
Okay,
right.
Go ahead.
So jumped over to the federal side of things. And the way that happened, by being director of the Indian Housing Authority in Fayetteville, I was able to serve on the board of the Indian Housing Council, I think it was called, which was funded by Congress, and it was kind of like a think tank to kind of look at Indian housing across the nation and help problem solve. And so that was under the Clinton administration, and I didn't get an intern, so don't hold out against me. But it was an exciting opportunity. So the way that happened, I was at the Housing Council meeting, and we're all around the table, and they had a vacancy up at HUD. And so the idea was to try to get that position filled, and those positions in DC, the appointments are kind of tough. A lot of travel, a lot of demands, that kind of thing. And so we came up with 2 or 3 possible candidates from other tribes across the nation. We met and had the interviews. They all backed out after we had the interviews, and they learned more about the job, and they just said, nope, not coming to DC. So we were given a deadline by Henry Cisneros, who was HUD secretary, and he was under the gun too, because with the way things go in DC and funding and everything, you gotta keep things moving forward. So he was on the chairman of the Indian Housing Council to bring the board back together and see what alternatives we could come up with. So as soon as I got back to Raleigh after that meeting, I started receiving phone calls, and it was like, Greg, why don't you consider this? I said, no, I'm on the board, and I think that would be a conflict of interest for me to even think about that. I'm not put together that way. I'm not pushing Greg Richardson. Oh no, but we're kind of in a jam here. We've got a commitment from Secretary Cisneros that he's going to appoint. This is a new position at HUD, and we've got a commitment from him, and we've got to come up with somebody. Would you please consider this? You're single. Everybody else has got family. If they move, they got to move their family, and this is just not doable. So I said, well, I'll think about it. So after about a week of thinking about it, I called him back and I says, I'll submit an application. So then I became assistant to the secretary. New position. That also put me in a good position to ask some other questions of HUD, because we had audience with the HUD secretary. And since I'm working directly with Joe Schuler is my boss, and he reports directly to the secretary. So one day we're sitting in the office talking, and I says, Joe, we've got an Indian housing office here at HUD. I said, one thing that I do not understand is why the Indian housing office is not at secretary level. I said, now HUD has 63 programs at HUD at that time, and every one of the lead people in those programs are deputy assistant secretaries. But when you look over here on the O chart for the Indian program, it's a Indian housing director. I says, I don't understand that. Are we not as important as, the other programs in the state? We got 63 other programs, and everybody's a deputy assistant secretary except the Indian program. And Joe leaned over and he says, Greg, I don't understand that. He says, but I want to find out. So it was just a matter of a few weeks. He came back, and when he talked with Henry Cisneros, and Henry put word out, he wanted to know why that difference was to his lead team, and nobody knew why that was a director instead of a deputy assistant secretary. Well, short and long is that position became a deputy assistant secretary. And Jackie Potter, remember her from NCAI, was there for years. She was the first one in that, she was the second one in that spot. And she held that position for many, many years. So now we have a deputy assistant secretary that covers the Indian housing program. So I said all that to say, having people in key positions, and when we go back to 75, we had nothing. We didn't have an Indian commission. We didn't have a secretary of DOA. We didn't have an Indian Heritage Commission. We didn't have, people in key roles and responsibilities. So we've evolved since, 75 to now to having 0 people in key position to multiple people in key positions, both at the state and federal level. So that makes a real difference when you got a voice. And I didn't, mean to, mention my role at HUD, and what I said to the assistant secretaries to put any kind of, halo over me or anything, because I'm not like that. But being there in that space really made a difference in terms of making something happen for our people. So now that office has more authority. When the cabinet meetings are held, you have our person that person's in that meeting, not downstairs somewhere waiting to see what's going to happen after the meeting.
Yeah, I think your point is very well taken about if you're not asking that question, if you're not in the room to ask that question, it doesn't get changed. Either it doesn't get changed because somebody doesn't want to change it, and there's some sort of intent behind it, or they just don't even notice. Like they didn't look and say, "Hey, wait a minute, why is this?"
Right.
Since you pointed it out, they made the change. I think that's
And I don't know this, but I have to think it's kind of what was going on when our leaders back in the late '60s were saying to the Lieutenant Governor Jim Hunt, John Willie Oxendine was saying that to the Lieutenant Governor, and then Lieutenant Governor became governor and a four-termer governor, and that influence carrying on for many, many years moving forward. I think we can say that that's all part of how we came to where we are now.
Yeah,
I think moving forward, we're just going to be better people because of that type of work.
I think you're absolutely right about that. So now you're at the federal level. How long are you? So you start there about in the mid '90s. Sure. How long are you there?
I was only there until that was interesting too. So as soon as I get the appointment in D.C., I get a call from Raleigh saying that Bruce Jones is going to retire, and I'm just taking this job. I said, "Wow, I got to apply for that," So anyway, after deep thought, because I got to D.C., and I never took the position in D.C. with any real intentions of long-term longevity in terms of staying there, because see, this was an appointed position, so I knew going there that my tenure was only good through the Clinton administration. So as soon as President Clinton's out of the seat, then I need to be looking for something else anyway. I need to already be gone. So when I got the word about Bruce retiring, I knew that I had set my sights on competing for that position. So did compete, 60 applicants, and got the job.
And what was the job?
Director of the Indian Commission.
Excellent. And so what year did you get the directorship?
I came back in January 1995, excuse me. 75 to 95.
That's right.
Yep.
So you had 20 years there.
Right.
And how long were you in that position?
I'm still in that position.
I had to ask.
Yeah.
So, so 95, and that's almost another 20 years, right?
Yeah.
And so tell me, how have the last 20 years gone?
Exciting. I mean, be in a position like this, I think the team here, can attest to the fact that you have an opportunity to do some exciting things, bring about some exciting changes in the state, helping other people get appointed into key positions, supporting things like creating new commissions and new efforts. But one of the things that I've always thought about, we only have so many people at the Indian Commission staff and commission members. So my philosophy has always been that we've got to figure out how we can get more of our people in other key positions throughout the state, throughout the counties, and at the national level. And I believe the last 20 years, we can just, we can see where that's at now. We've got American Indian Center at UNC Chapel Hill. We've got huge programs at UNCP. Back in 75, we didn't have these programs on campuses. So we've had that evolution occurring too. So we've got multiple now nonprofits in our state and entities that work on Indian matters. NACNAO, Native American Youth Organization, working to build youth leadership capacity, that kind of thing. We've got United Tribes that runs the Indian Unity Conference. And right now, we've got almost 50 different Indian organizations in the state. So I made a list of those a couple of weeks ago, and probably the second or third time I've done that. And every time I make that list, it's grown. So what's the message from that? I hadn't figured that out yet. But what we do know is that we've got multiple voices in our state, and no one person, no one voice speaks for all of us. We have a collective voice now, and we have voices that speak to individual and different things throughout our state in different capacities. So I think that's all made us stronger. I think it's made us more diverse in our thought patterns and in what we set out to do. And I think it's certainly increased the power that we have in the state. You know, oftentimes we don't really look at how fortunate we are as a people. We don't see that as a people because we're too close to it. We're just kind of in our, not necessarily a silo, but we're in our community, and people don't oftentimes appreciate all that we have. One of the quotes I make quite frequently, you know, we could look at South Carolina and look at Virginia and look west of Tennessee. You won't find what you've got here in North Carolina, for better or for worse. So I think I know we're in a position in North Carolina right now where a lot of other states are looking to North Carolina to get ideas and look at examples. Just got one from down in Louisiana. In fact, this afternoon I'm supposed to be in a meeting with the board members of the, what's the tribe down there? I can't remember. But anyway, the idea is that they are wanting to look at our state recognition procedures. They already have a commission, that they don't have any recognition procedures. So we've sent them copies of our recognition procedures. And then when we look at Alabama, Maryland, and some other states where they've got Indian commissions, you look at their statutes and you see our statute, certain elements of our statute. They're all different, but what I was saying is that many of these other states have borrowed our statutes to go to work on developing some things in their own state. So,
yeah, that's a perfect overview. And then now to get into the granular, you know, when you come back in '95, this is a top position as opposed to when you started in '75,
yeah,
right? So how do you feel when you come in and you're looking at the job from now this vantage point as opposed to the other vantage point? Maybe, you know, you drew on what you had, or maybe you
I would say I drew on what I had, and I would say that I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of key people who, you know, who helped me to get where I am right now. The leaders that I mentioned are certainly, there's a lot of people, and also people doesn't have to be, you know, a real popular leader in the community to be influential. A lot of the people that have helped me along the way have been grassroots people. Then the preacher. You know, the first person I talked to when I got this job was Reverend Mike Cummins. Went down and met with him.
Your old roommate.
Yeah. Went down and met with him because I wanted to hear his perspective in terms of what direction he thinks, you know, about a government entity like an Indian Commission. You know, drawing on his values as a minister and a person who's become a leader in his own right because he's become in his career, he became national president of the Southern Baptist Convention or something like that. So you had to go talk to people like that. In my own church, community, Reverend C.H. Richardson was not able to really walk and get around, so I went to his house and sat with him one Sunday and just chit-chatted with him. And I'll always value those conversations because, I mean, you can learn a lot by just listening to people like that and drawing on their experiences and what have you. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to convince me to listen to people. So, I think that you know. So you talked about expansion. You talked about how the stuff that you worked on over the last 18 years. We said 20, but it will be accurate. 18 years. We talked about how there's a lot of good there, a lot of good things going on. I'm wondering if there's something you would do differently in the last 18 years.
I would say, you know, if we could do more to help develop youth. You know, we don't really have a really strong initiative, youth-based initiative. We had that in the Educational Talent Search program, the first program that the commission had. And that was a program where we could bring together 200-300 students, put them on a college campus, take them on tours to DC and go visit the U.S. Capitol, bring them to Raleigh and visit the state legislature and those kind of things. The idea was to keep them in school and to make sure they graduate, you know, give them guidance in terms of taking the right courses, give them guidance in terms of getting a resume right, all those things that an educational counselor would do. That was a tremendous success. So as it goes in government programs, though, over time, the dynamics change. And so while we had that program for many, many years, all of a sudden we hit a brick wall. So when we get around to the next funding cycle, they have different priorities. So now the program that we had didn't fit their model anymore because they want the program to be based in an educational system, based in a school, based in a school type environment. So their education, U.S. Department of Education's theory was, it should be combined somehow with an educational component. So we submitted, I think we submitted a very good proposal, but the ratings didn't come back good because we were not part of, Robeson County school system or Halifax County school system. We're operating at state level. So we're not, or a university. Now universities like Fayetteville State has a talent search program right now. But as, DOA, Commission of Indian Affairs, then the people who are rating our proposal didn't come in very strong. Disappointed, of course, but that is something that we've not been able to build back. So what we've done to try to counter that, we've tried as much as we can support NCAIHC, sponsoring students to the NCAIHC conference, paying for registration and books. I think we were able to do about 20 or 30 last year. And so that's helping some, but want to try to get that back. Looking at new and different things over the last 18 years, Indian child welfare, that's an area that is very close and dear to me and a lot of leaders looking for ways to see if we can improve a system, whereas we can get more American Indian foster parents in the system. We're getting ready for our 2023 Indian Child Welfare Gathering, and as of last week, there are over 100 children in welfare according to the state numbers. There's more than that in the Robeson County DSS numbers. So Rachel Jones just sent me that information. I don't have the numbers in my head, but I thought, oh my gosh, all these children sitting here in foster care and no homes no Indian parents to, come and help them and get them. So that's a concern. Domestic violence, that's another one. We have it in our communities. That's one of our newest efforts. We're getting into our 4th year now of that, and paying attention to that, we've got some domestic violence advocates out there, not advocating for domestic violence, but staff that works in the community to make sure that if there's a case, we've got somebody to follow up and help that person who is impacted to get into a shelter, to get away from that situation, hopefully to save lives. So that's one of our newest components. Economic development, we've not been able to get dedicated money to help Indian people get into business. That's a small business administration component. They have, some advocates that they do in that area, but we've not been able to get any real money to help Indian people, number one, to put together a business plan. Number two, if having someone in place, if there's someone who's struggling with taxes or those kind of things, we don't have that. What we do have is ability to connect dots. So sometimes connecting dots is not good enough. I mean, you can refer somebody to the SBA and they're going to get on the phone, they're going to go to a website. And for grassroots people, that often doesn't work that well. So you need a dedicated person to be able to pay attention to that. Go meet with them and say, I've looked at your business plan, or we've got an entity that helps people with developing business plans, get that business plan up to date. I'd really like to see some way. Several years ago, we were working with our economic development component, and the strategy was to try to do an inventory, tribe by tribe, of their assets. And of course, that ended up being a little bit of a challenge because you're asking tribes to show and tell all your income and all the property that you own. And it's not that we were trying to collect that information to be housed at the commission. We were trying to get the tribes to do that. And why is that important? So it's important because we need to know what our true wealth is. So if, if we're, tribal operations is a business operation. So you need to know what your wealth is. So having that inventory done, and there's been several attempts, one or two tribes really bought into it, but overall it didn't. So if there's a 100-acre farm coming up for sale down the road, and we want to grab onto that land, if you got everything in place, just like our own personal situation. We got a business plan, we got our information set up at the bank, and we're going to go buy that house or that acreage down the road. Boom, you walk in, sign the dotted line, you got it. You don't have the lag time of having to go collect all that information and run with it. So all throughout our communities right now, farms are kind of disappearing, and non-Indians who were large farmers are kind of giving up farms. Coharie has a good strategy on that, and I like bragging about them because they go after it, and I think they've just come in possession of, or about to become in possession of around a 100-acre farm that's being donated to them. They don't even have to buy it, but because they stepped up and says, here's what we can do with this land, and if you're, the owner's going to get some tax breaks because they're donating it to a tribe. So, hey, win-win situation. Greg's the only one I know is doing that, and I have a lot of respect for what he's done. He's on the commission, so I like to brag on what he's doing there. But I think each tribe can do that because there's, in communities where people have moved away, outside of the communities, moved to other states, they don't have any interest in coming back here, that land's sitting there, and somebody's going to talk to them and say, well, you'd be interested in donating this land or selling it, heartbreaking situation. I won't mention the community. Nice farm, sat out there for sale for years and years. Nobody was buying. All the family had moved away. None of the kids wanted this land and sat there. Somebody from California bought that land, that farm, sight unseen. Sight unseen. Because, if you're in California and you're looking at a, 30-acre tract of land and what you'd have to pay for it in California and what you'd have to pay for it here is nothing, Yeah, I'll sign it. So that's something we've not been as successful with in terms of economic development as I see it. It's just been hard to do that kind of economic development in our Indian communities. Individually, we've done excellent as individual people. Lumbee Bank is a good example where people have partnered. Lumbees have come together and partnered and created a banking system. Lumbee Bank does not get credit for all that it has done, I don't think, at all. I mean, it's a minority bank, and we got 10, 12 branch offices now. I don't remember I haven't seen their financial statement in quite a while, but, it's incredible that, Lumbee's had that vision to set up a bank and look at what you've got created now. They can compete with any small banking operation anywhere. Larry Chavis, until all his career, he's to me he was a hero, and the board that put all that together. It's just amazing. That's just a tremendous success story that could be talked about a lot, and hopefully you guys will help document some of that. Because we have the Indian Bank in the United States that's talked about a lot, and it does some good things in pretty much federally recognized communities, and they've been successful. But I don't think they've had to compete with things like Lumbee Bank had to compete with. You got to, chartered a bank in a time when you couldn't even borrow money from a bank as an Indian person. How about that? In 74, 75, when that was all being created, it was unheard of to have that happen. They did it. They did it. So a lot of stories like that, though. But 75 forward, it's been a lot of change. Whole different community we have here as far as Indian people now and opportunities. I just wish that somehow we could get more young people focused on taking advantage of these opportunities. I have have situations in my own family where I can't get that to happen. Wish I'd have had those opportunities to go to school and get all my books and tuition paid and, finish and come out. Young people can go to community college now and come out making really good money with a 2-year degree. In some cases, more than a 4-year degree person can make. Why wouldn't you want to do that? I don't know. That's something we got to work on.
For sure, yeah. And we started today talking about your career with the bank, and we just wrapped up talking about a bank, although a different bank, and it's definitely changed over all these years. And so now, it's the career to one side. I'm sort of interested in. We've talked a little bit about it today and then the last time, but where did you kind of develop your passion? Is there a moment you can pinpoint where you kind of developed your passion for American Indian advocacy? Because you can hear it. So I'm just interested to know if there's some kind of moment.
I guess it's just part of my DNA. Growing up, with my granddad, grandmom, and my dad, and my parents, it's always been part of our life. So anytime you're at home, whether I was 12, 14, 15, it was always some discussion about Indians, and always an interest in terms of, well, what's going on up there at the tribal school, and what's going on with the, tribal, who's running for tribal council, all that, still, those dynamics still play out now. So I would say the influence of my grandparents and my parents has played out a great deal in terms of why, I made a decision to leave the bank and come to work with the commission and not know anything about where it was going because there was no track record. You couldn't look back and say, well, the commission's been involved, but, it could have very well went the other way, and that's kind of what I was reading between the lines. My dad was saying, you were at the bank, you were the first to go to the bank, and, you got a retirement plan down there. Yeah, but Dad, I'm going to work with the state, and I'm still going to have a retirement plan. So, okay, well, yeah, okay, go to work with the commission.
Yeah, and along that same line, I mean, your parents and your grandparents, but what about other mentors for you?
Yeah. I would say my first grade teacher, Leela Jane Clark from Robeson County, she was an influence. Here's a person I didn't know, but she'd always encourage us to, study and that kind of thing. And then I've seen, like Larry Chavis at Lumbee Bank, and I mentioned before. I've always, thought, he was successful because he really believed in what he was doing. And I think that's the ingredients in terms of any career. If you believe in what you're doing, you work hard. It's not just a day at work. It's just not a paycheck. It's about a mission kind of thing. And I guess that's kind of the way I see it. I've got some pottery at the office. I've got some things on my shelf there at the office. Lenora Oxendine. She was one of our teachers at Haliwa too, and then when she retired, she became an artist. I've got one of her needle nose baskets there at the office, and sometimes I'll look up at it and think about her, And Bruce Jones, director of the Indian Commission, he was a powerful fellow and got a lot of things moving during his tenure at the Commission of Indian Affairs. Saw a lot of challenges. He was not always well liked, and in a position like this, we're not always going to be well liked, but we're not in it to be well liked. We're in it for an effort to get things done for our people. Early Maynor, the first director of the Indian Commission, and Harold Deese, the first deputy, highly respected him, and he came from the burnt swamp side of things, out of the church side of it. So that's how that network worked, and that was very successful too in terms of getting us to where we are now. But politics can enter into the equation and then can be really destructive. And that entered into the room with Mr. Early and Harold Deese. and that was not a, pretty episode for the Commission of Indian Affairs. We lost some traction during that period of time. And there were some people worried about the commission at that point because they didn't know what impact that kind of bickering was going to have at a time when you're trying to stand up an organization and get the commission going, but at the same time you have that internal fighting going on. So, politically, one was trying to, I guess, overrule the other one. One wanted one out, the other one wanted the other one out. So, it was a kind of pull and tug going on right there. And that was a very nervous period of time for me because I didn't understand that kind of politics. I was like thinking, why can't they just get along? Why are we, trying to destroy each other here? So that was a kind of tedious time for not just me, but for all the commission staff at that time. Because we were put in a position where when that was going on, it's like, well, you got to choose one side or the other. You're going to be Harold East or you're going to be with Mr. Early. And I'm not going to be with either one. Well, that's not good. You got to choose a side. So we were really worried when those dynamics were playing out at the commission. But anyway, the commission stepped in and resolved that issue, and from that point on, while Bruce was there, we didn't have that kind of thing going on internally at the commission, but we did have some partisan politics interplay a little bit, and partisan politics is good. We have to have two, schools of thought. You have to have both, but we have to be careful not to, have that involved to the point where it becomes destructive for all of us. And that played out in '89, right after I left the commission in 1980, at the commission level, not at the staff side, because you had Lonnie Revels, who was appointed by the governor at that time as chairman of the commission, who didn't see eye to eye with Bruce. And so there was that pull and tug there, kind of a fight going on, and got really nasty, got elevated all the way up to the governor's office. And for the first time, the governor removed the chairman of the Commission of Indian Affairs. Lonnie Revels got removed from the Commission of Indian Affairs. And so after that, Patrick Clark was appointed to the commission. And so, we've been, I think, it's really been good for us not to get in a situation like that where partisan politics gets us to the point where you'd have to have a governor step in. And then going all the way back to '75 with an internal fight where the commission has to step in and actually, pursue change. So, those were some points in time in history in the Commission of Indian Affairs that were rather tedious, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure, and that's sort of rounds right into the next question, and it's I've heard you say a couple of things that could be an answer to this, so maybe you want to go with one of them, or maybe there's something we haven't talked about yet. But what do you think is the most pressing need for the American Indian community in general in North Carolina?
Pressing need right now, I think, is health care, and Medicaid reform is talked about quite a bit, and no matter which side of the aisle you're on, there's pros and cons for that. But I think that would tremendously benefit our people, especially grassroots community people who does not have a state retirement plan, have issues that need constant attention, and provide our people with some ways to, make sure that they're healthy or improve their health. We as state-recognized Indians, don't have access to the Indian Health Service. Only the Eastern Band of Cherokee, which is also state and federally recognized, they have access to the Indian Health Service. So they have great opportunities to have their health checks and the benefits in terms of improving their health situation, that more so than the state recognized tribes. So just maybe through Medicaid reform, this will improve that. But we certainly don't have access to direct health benefits as Indian people, like the federally recognized tribes. So we can solve that. I think we'll see improvements in diabetes and stroke, cardiovascular problems, those kind of things. One of the other things that we've stood up over the last 20, 18 years is that we have an Indian Health Board now that's established. And the Indian Health Board is led by Ronnie Bell. Thank you, Kerry. Ronnie Bell, and you know, when we had talked about setting that up, that was an outgrowth of the Indian Commission through the Health Committee. And you know, when I was in Washington, I got to know people that were part of the National Indian Health Board, and became good friends with some of them. And so after that, I thought, well, what can we do in North Carolina to establish something that's similar, not the same, but similar? So brought that idea to the Commission's Indian Health Board and brought some people together, brainstormed, and now we have an Indian Health Board. So what are they doing? They're looking at these very issues in terms of how COVID has impacted our communities and what can we do in relation to health issues in our state. And it's a think tank more than anything right now, but rolling out pretty soon is going to be a survey on tobacco impact, tobacco cessation. So we're working with them now. It's going to be a contract, and we're hopeful that we'll have a 2-year contract to do some surveys in our communities to see what the impact of tobacco has had. Now, we know that since tobacco cessation programs rolled out probably 10 years ago, there's a whole lot less people smoking. I mean, think about it. When have you walked around an Indian community and seen somebody smoking? I haven't. I don't see it. You know, it used to be everybody was smoking, you know, everywhere you go, in the offices, in the tribal meetings, everybody was smoking. Walk out of church on Sunday, everybody smoking, flickering cigarette butts. Don't see that. I saw one fellow this weekend who was smoking, and he did that, flickered the butt out. And I thought, boy, I haven't seen that in quite a while. So I wonder if somebody's not yelling at him for throwing that cigarette butt on the church grounds. So that one really, I think is going to make a really big impact.
Yeah, and so this is something that was something I'll ask everybody as part of this, and then this is something I'll also ask everybody, and then I'll turn it over to these two to see what they have to ask. But what do you think is the most pressing need for your community, the Haliwa-Saponi community?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a lot of needs, but you know, we have no sewage there. So for our community to grow, and we have a lot going on, but for Haliwa-Saponi to grow, we need to figure out some way to bring more business and opportunities in the communities. Without sewage, you're limited. So everybody's on septic system. We have a lot of adverse soil conditions in Haliwa, just like you do in Waccamaw-Siouans. Soil conditions, you're talking about low-lying areas of soil that just won't perk. And of course, you can make the soil perk, but if you're a modest family trying to build a modest home and you're going to have to make the soil perk, you're talking about a tremendous additional cost on building that house, because you're probably $10,000 to $15,000 just to get started with drain lines and pump stations and all that. So it could make housing in some communities not even affordable anymore. And so we're looking at that, working with USDA. USDA has a project that's right through Hollister that they're capitalizing on. They're going after some federal funding to see if they can run some type of, or develop some type of system right in that general area, but it won't take care of all of our needs. And healthcare is another issue there, because same thing as I was mentioning before. We have a lot of families that cannot afford to buy their own health insurance.
Well, I Appreciate that. I'll see. Ms. Britt, has anything you'd like to ask?
Sure. I know the U.S. Census has
Mhm.
been
Right.
something you've been very, very involved
Right.
in over the years. Can you say a little bit about your participation in the U.S. Census and
Yeah.
how do you see that American Indian involvement
Oh, yeah.
going forward as we all age out of
Yeah.
service to the U.S. Census?
Right. Well, the dynamics with the census, I'll be the first to say when I got appointed to the U.S. Census Advisory Committee for the 1990 census, I guess it was. And that happened through my interplay with the job up in D.C. But when I got the call and the letter inviting me to be a part of the U.S. Census Advisory Committee, I thought, boring? Why do I want to be on this? I'm not sure I want to be about this. And so they kept working on me, so I took that appointment. And so attending my first couple of meetings, and the advisory committees, at that time, there's American Indian, Alaska Native, African American, Asian, Pacific Islanders, white, all these are like subcommittees. And so on the American Indian, Alaska Native subcommittees, mostly were federally recognized Indians from other parts of the state or country. And the reason that the census contacts kept calling me is because I represent state recognized communities, off-reservation communities, and they wanted someone with a voice that had experience from those communities on this advisory committee. So I reluctantly accepted it. But you know what happened getting into it? The policy stuff really was like flipping a switch. When you get into discussions about how they do things and how they start lining up for the next census. So in 1990, they're lining up for the 2000 census, right? So the policies, they're reviewing the old policies and then setting out to see what need to be changed for the next decennial census, all right? So you're one of 10, 12 people from across the country sitting on this American Indian Alaska Native committee. And there's different things that census bring to you. They've got different programs in the census arena. So you've got media, for example. The media campaign, I'll just give you an example of what happened in that one meeting. So we're getting the briefing from the folks that's got the contract to run the media campaign nationally. And so they're coming in to tell us how they're going to recommend to us how the media ad campaign is going to work for Indian country. And so I wanted to know how it was going to work in North Carolina. So they talked about it globally and how they're going to be working with TV networks, newspapers, and all kinds of entities to get word out about the census. So the ad would be on TV, one of the ads was, I think it was 2000 census, it's your future, don't leave it blank, was their theme line. All right, fill out the census. Well, when they came in to present, I asked the question about North Carolina. So the consultant was put in position to answer a question about how is it that we're going to get census information to the Indian communities in North Carolina. And so there was a little pause in the room, and the guy came back and they looked at their documents and looked at the computer and said, "Oh, we're going to be working with the networks out of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina." And I said, "Oh, okay, well that's interesting, but I just wanted to let you know that Myrtle Beach networks, TV and radio, does not reach Haliwa-Saponi, Coharie, Waccamaw, Siouan, may reach a little Lumbee, but not." I says, "That plan won't work for North Carolina. Won't reach the eastern band of Cherokee. They're all the way in the western part of the state, 5 or 6 hours from Myrtle Beach." And they said, "Oh, well, we need to talk about that." So they went on. Other people had questions, wanted to talk with me. So when the meeting was winding up, came back to me. And they said, well, the question is, well, how can we resolve this problem? And what do we need to do to resolve this problem? I said, that's simple. I can give you the names of radio and TV stations that reach all the communities in North Carolina. So, you know, we can start with Fayetteville Observer in Fayetteville, North Carolina. We can work with News Observer, Charlotte Observer, WRAL TV, the network out of Wilmington that reaches over to Lumbee, Asheville network up in the western part of the state, and just went on and on. Oh, okay, well, we need your help. So at the end of the meeting, they came over after everything was over. We sat there with a pad, and I wrote the names of these networks out. Just simple as that. Robertsonian was another paper that I put on that list. So that year, when the ads came out, Robertsonian printed census ad. That was good for them. They got paid good money for that. But the information was there for the Lumbee community. Same thing for the radio and TV networks. WRL reaches broad area. You know, the Wilmington reaches all the way up to probably Fayetteville. And so to me, it was just so simple to, you know, put these networks and these newspapers on a sheet of paper. And I didn't have to give them an address or a name or anything, because that's all on the internet. So they came to us with one. I guess they wanted to go to Myrtle Beach and be based out of Myrtle Beach. But we got that done. I mean, just being in the room saying, hey, you know, there's a way that we can get that information to the Indian communities. And it's not hard, you know.
Can you speak to our population being counted by the census and why that's important for North Carolina?
Right. Well, it's important because, you know, what we're experiencing for the 2020 census looked like a low count. And so back that up in terms of the impact on the Indian community. So if we come out with a low count, then that's going to mean less workforce money, less Indian housing money, less money for education, less money for our communities. So it's just very important, you know, for everybody to be counted. It's like the old slogan from 2000, the 2020 census is your future. Don't leave it blank. So if we're not counting, we're leaving ourselves out, because for the next 10 years, appropriations for these programs are going to be based on that count. And so the 2020 census, I think, presents some interesting and new dynamics, because the census was performed at a time when there was not a lot of political support for the census. The budget was cut tremendously. The committees that I mentioned, where the committees were broken out for each of the populations, were condensed to one committee. So there was one or two Indian people on a committee of 20 or whatever from across and they were supposed to speak for all of us. So if there's no one there from the state recognized communities, the people at the table won't have a clue in terms of why it's important for our communities to be counted, you know. So it's just, you know, it's just something else. So you had at the federal level, under the administration at that time, just whacking away, trying to do away with the programs, so you had less ability to go out and collect that data. And then after we rolled into the 2020 census, we had COVID coming in the door. So you had issues with, you know, people didn't want to go door to door. I mean, they shut down a lot of the actual door-to-door census. They just halted that. The other thing that happened in 2020 that was totally different from 2010 and certainly 1990, they were using electronic devices. They wanted everybody to use an iPad. Well, we all don't have iPads. You know, we might have a smartphone, and a lot of our people don't even have a smartphone. You still got a flip phone. So you're supposed to go onto the electronic device and do your census. Well, if you don't have an iPad, you can't do that. Or if you can't get on because you don't have internet. You know, Navajo, for example, hardly any internet out there. And Waccamaw Sioux in Hollister, I'm talking to my sister Saturday night, goes dead, you know, just, you can't. So if you're working on something like a census and you lose connection, you lose interest in completing it, because when you come back into it, you probably got to start over, and you're not going to do that. And you'll say, heck with that, you know. So the data is very important, and the policies up front. So we need to figure out how we can get the American Indian Advisory Committee put back in place at the Census Bureau, because without that, you've got a real skewed view in terms of what's going to be taking place with the census and the need for that.
All right. Excuse me. Do you have anything you want to ask him?
I do. You were talking a lot about the civil rights movement, particularly in regards to Indians at the state level here in North Carolina in the 60s and 70s. Our sister organization, North Carolina African American Heritage Commission, started a civil rights trail. It's a marker program back in 2020, and we might have an opportunity to suggest some events or places or things. I know you mentioned the Heart of Raleigh Hotel and the creation of the Indian Housing Authority in North Carolina, but what are some of the other things regarding civil rights in terms of Indians in the state of North Carolina that come to your mind?
Well, I think going back to 1975, the creation of the Indian Housing Authority was certainly monumental in terms of what it means and how it impacted the communities. I think the first people that were appointed to state commissions and boards, they're not necessarily places, but they're markers in history. So, having people appointed as, like Jim Lowry, was appointed state purchasing officer at one point. You're talking about Jim Lowry, who owned 2 or 3 automobile dealerships, very dynamic person, highly respected. But having people like that being appointed in key positions to again be a voice for our people, I think that's important. Maxton Pond, I'm sure you probably already got that one on the list, but the Indian schools out there, I know y'all are working on markers. The idea of having these markers established, I think that's just so important. I think a friend of mine in Hope County said she thinks one of the old Hawkeye schools is still standing on some farmer's land out there. Gwen Locklear down there knows where that's at. Probably not much left, but if there's anything left, maybe we can get a picture of it. I don't know. I have no idea where it's located, but important history like that. Haliwa-Saponi, both as a school and now as a charter school. So it's, started out, in 1956, 57 as a private school, and then became state supported. And then in 67, we had to close it because, we can't have any more segregated schools. So schools closed, so we all went to public schools after that. So important pieces in the history. I think too, the history of UNCP, to me, that would be just a big piece of the state history because of what was going on. Not only at Pembroke Indian Normal School, but what that meant in terms of Indian people, getting to other stations in life, like the people who graduated from UNCP and Dennis Lowry and what's his cousin's name that used to be mayor of Lebanon, Tennessee. Jack Lowry, owns mega corporation, flies his own jet, and Dennis had a high-rise building in Raleigh County. Well, that may not have happened if it hadn't been for UNCP, giving them that opportunity to go to college and get to a point where they could compete in these areas. And there's just multiple people that came out of UNCP that could be highlighted. I mean, it's just, and that to me, getting that done is kind of like a piece of recognition for us, because in so many ways, we're still looked at as not real Indians, but we're real Indians, and we're doing real things and have been doing real things for a long time. So, and sometimes I joke with some of my federally recognized Indians. I said, well, tell me how many federally recognized Indians you got in your tribe that owns their own Learjet. Or tell me how many Indians you have in your tribe that can donate mega millions to UNCP and build the Thomas Center. Thing looks like the White House almost, one man. Gosh, those things are just outstanding, man. That's incredible, And so we have those old schools, you know, Fayetteville, you have Les Maxwell, you know, East Carolina, Clinton's, you know, we have to move on those because after we're gone, who knows, you know, it won't be anything written down, no pictures or nothing said. I mean, you know, could be maybe one piece could be is highlighting some of these success stories that came out of UNCP. You know, Jim Lowry on the NC State side, you know, graduated from NC State in aeronautical engineer.
Wow.
Yeah. Jack, you got to be in that era that he did that. Dr. Jim Jones, going to law school at Wake Forest. They weren't supposed to be there, folks. If people had known that they were Indians, they would have. That application would have been over here somewhere else, probably. But look at where they went to. You know, a lot of good things.
So I do have one more question, and this is something that comes up occasionally for Curry and I when we're out in the community, and usually from non-natives, the interchangeability of American Indian and Native American. You've had one of the best explanations that I've heard. I tried to repeat it to somebody at some of our colleagues at the Capitol the other week, and I just butchered it. So if you could you explain that and why you prefer American Indian and state government?
Well, you know, I work for the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs, and we're statutory. So when I came on board in '95, that was one of the questions I posed to the commission, because I wanted to know if, you know, when we're doing reports and, you know, referring to the work of the commission, should we use Native American or use American Indian? And so Larry Townsend was on the commission at that time, and y'all know Larry. You know, he don't mind speaking up. So he basically didn't give many people a chance to really respond and end up speaking for everybody. And so the vote was American Indian. You know, use that term in all the work of the Commission of Indian Affairs. So one of the things I've heard Larry talk about that's kind of really stuck in my mind all these years. He stood up at the NCAI, the National Congress of American Indians, and you know, he was making that point, because even at the National Congress of American Indians, you have people using different terms. Indigenous people, you know, First Nations people, and on and on and on. So the thing is, you know, whether we like this history or not that's written about us in the United States and how we're portrayed in history books, it is what it is. And the term American Indian is all the way through it. You won't find Native American in any treaties. You won't find Native American in any old executive orders relating to Indians. And so now we're moving to a point where we're using these other terms, and then the worry is that, are we going to get lost because of terminology? So we start calling ourselves Native Americans in one document. We're referring to ourselves as Indigenous people in another document, First Nations people in another document. 100 years from now, somebody picks up the documents and oh, they were First Nations people, but lose the Indian identity. And you wonder sometimes, is that not by design? Is that not by design? It's just like when the census was first started, we weren't counted as American Indian in many ways, except for the census that was performed on reservations by non-Indians. So in our communities, you had a non-Indian census taker coming around and saying, well, there's no Indians here, you know, these people are colored people. Well, everybody that's not white is some form of color, right? We're all colored. So that got to be interpreted as that we're not Indians, we're African Americans. So a lot of our history now has been placed over in that column. So if you look at the old census, you know, for some of our communities in our counties, our people were counted as colored people. And colored people at that time were basically labeled as Negroes. And so now you have people who pick that up and say, oh, you're all not really Indian. See here, we got the census. But the Indian people didn't call themselves colored. We've always called ourselves Indian. We've always supported Indian cause. We've always taught that in our families. And that's, I don't say that to any disrespect to, you know, any other population. It's just that it was the way that it was kind of a design. And if we're not careful, it's going to be a design moving forward of genocide to further deplete us as a population. And as I mentioned before, there's over 40, almost 50 different Indian organizations in North Carolina. And each one of those have a distinct purpose, and they compete for different things, money at the General Assembly, or, you know, grants from, you know, government agencies and all. So where's that all going to end when we're gone in the next 30, 50, 100 years, when we've got these dynamics coming in with the American Indian population? You don't have that with the other populations, because the other populations are so large, they'll never get diminished. They're always, whatever they're called, they're going to still be, they're going to have their own identity. But with us, we run the risk of totally disappearing from the radar screen. That's Greg Richardson's worry, that, you know, 100 years after I'm gone, you know, are we really going to be connecting back to, you know, the point of contact when Columbus landed? He was lost and he called us Indians. We don't like that. A lot of, you know, I have concerns about it. But it is the documented history that we have. So at some point, maybe we need to figure out how we can couch maybe a preference, a statement. When we're talking about American Indians, we're referred to as Native Americans, we're referred to Indigenous, many other things, but the original identifier was Indian, going all the way back to the point of contact, going all the way back to those treaties that I mentioned. These are historic and legal documents. So I think we have to really be concerned and always try to protect that part of it. Otherwise, we're gonna be in a hurtful way, I think. And then I do think that there's a movement underway to declassify race totally. So, for example, child's born today at Wake Med, the mother wants Indian placed on that birth certificate, and that mother has to fight to get that happen, to make that happen. That instance right there at office, just within the last couple of weeks, got one. It's a little different situation, but a Saponi one just within the last couple of days. It's on my computer now, and the family's upset. You know, they shouldn't have to, especially when a baby's born. You shouldn't be having to, you know, deal with politics and stuff like that, you know. But it's my understanding North Carolina has adopted the national the national norm for race, and that's to be nothing to have race on it. Another common complaint I get, someone gets a traffic ticket, stop by a highway patrolman or county official, give them a ticket, and they put something else on the birth certificate. It's like when I had a meeting at the Guilford Native powwow with the sheriff up there. You know, I was introduced to him, and he's got a co-Harry, that's one of his lead people on his team, and we were standing around talking about dynamics, the dynamics of Indian affairs and all that you get into. And we got to talking about, you know, the tickets that are sometimes issued to an American Indian, and they get the ticket and they look up there and they got me down as white, black, or, you know, but not Indian. And some of the people have got the Indian tag on their car, on the license, the car on the license, tag on the car, and they still put something else on the driver's license. And I said, well, Sheriff, you know, we have a lot of issues right now with violence and everything, with law enforcement and everything, and I really appreciate what you all do. I couldn't do it. You know, you got a thankless job. But a little thing like, you know, someone's race on their driver's license shouldn't be triggering a fight at 3 o'clock on a Saturday night after somebody's been out partying, and you pull them over and you put them down as something else after they've gone through all this other stuff, being treated unfairly as an Indian person, and here's a ticket from a law enforcement officer that's going to trigger someone pulling a gun or a fight. He says, I want you to come up to one of my staff meetings. I want you to help me brief my deputies on these dynamics with that driver's license. We can pull out our driver's license right now. there's a place on there for race, but a lot of them, most of them are empty. So why isn't that being put there? You know, and the birth certificate is really, like Pete Richardson was on our commission years ago, grandbaby born. They're very, you know, very hardcore Indian family, and they didn't want to put the child's race on there. And then when he was a type, he gets in your face, you know. So when they got the paperwork, they had Haliwa-Saponi as the race on the birth certificate. Haliwa-Saponi is not a race. They put the tribe on there. And then he was mad about that. So he brought that up before he went off the commission. That was his thing at every commission meeting. But we haven't been able to get that changed. We had several meetings with Health and Human Services about it, and you know, the promises made. Oh, I'm on record. I better quit.
Good. Any other questions for him?
That's it for me. I'll cut it off.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Before we get in trouble, let's ask this question. What are you most proud of, or what's your biggest achievement?
I think the thing that we've done, continuation of the employment training program. I think that's, you know, making an impact really. And I think the philosophy that I mentioned quite frequently in the initial commission meetings about working to get American Indians appointed to other state boards and commissions. I think, you know, that's something that's really working here in North Carolina. It's not somebody asking for a bill through the General Assembly or anything. It's just working with officials who, you know, understand that this whole philosophy, and then our governor wanting to make sure that the state government is reflective of our of the population of our state. That's good for everybody. And so pushing that, keeping that out front, I think is one of the things that we've just got to keep doing, you know. And I know you know, the leadership here at this department, and with our department, with the secretary, she pushes it hard. And so we want to keep doing that. Yep.
Excellent. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add while we have the record open?
I just want to thank you all for what you're doing in terms of recording things like this and inviting people in to be interviewed. I would highly encourage you to continue that. I think you know, oral history is very important. You know, there's the old saying, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. But if it's not recorded in oral history, it didn't happen either. That's another thing. So, you know, I think we can, you know, using this technique and this philosophy is very important, because as I've sat in on these interviews, I've talked about things and remembered things that I hadn't talked about in many, many years. It just brought it out because, you know, the way that you've been asking the questions and just allowing me, you know, for you know, to be able to just talk about different things about me as a child going to Haliwa-Saponi, as a student, the challenges we face, you know, going to Haliwa, and me being mad because we had to ride on this blue bus and everybody else had yellow buses and didn't know at that time, oh, that was great, we had our own bus, you know. Yeah.
I can't help but to think, John asked you what were some of your motivators for your position is considered the top advocate for Indians in the state, and what brought you to that. I can't help but to think about that time you were denied the rental car at the airport.
Yeah, when I was coming back from Vietnam.
Yeah. That had to be.
Yeah, that was touching. Yep.
Yeah.
That was touching.
Absolutely. Well,
almost got me in trouble.
Good trouble.
Almost got me in trouble.
Well, thank you for sitting down and telling us your story and sharing all this with us. So we're happy to put it together.
You made it easy for me.
Good. Well, I'll go ahead and shut this down then.
Thank you.